Colleges panic, cancel DEI departments before getting forced to by law. Despite the failure of anti-DEI bills in Kentucky, major public universities such as Northern Kentucky University and the University of Kentucky have voluntarily dismantled or scaled back their diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, potentially as a preemptive measure to avoid more restrictive legislation in the future. These colleges are in defense mode because they know what's coming. Kentucky universities have cited the legislative priorities of state leaders as a factor in their decision to curtail DEI efforts. NKU's president, Katie Short-Thompson, explicitly mentioned the political climate and the needs to adapt, though it remains unclear if these changes are solely to forestall legislation or to align with internal goals. Though realistically, they don't want to be forced to comply with laws. They're trying to back off and thinking, hey, maybe temporarily things might change, but they know ultimately it's all going away. NKU dissolved its Office of Inclusive Excellence after its chief diversity officer stepped down. Similarly, the University of Kentucky disbanded its Office for Institutional Diversity and stopped mandating DEI training and DEI statements, signaling significant institutional shifts. The debate surrounding DEI has become politically charged, with Republican lawmakers like Emily Callaway questioning how DEI initiatives can be inclusive when they focus on race-specific groups like Black student unions. The rhetoric adds pressure on institutions to justify or modify their DEI strategies. And there's no way to justify discriminatory strategies. They're not legal, they're not appropriate, they're immoral, and they're getting stopped. Although Kentucky universities have made voluntary changes in DEI programs, it remains uncertain whether these moves will satisfy lawmakers or whether more stringent anti-DEI legislation will ultimately be introduced. They're not getting away with it in Kentucky, they're not getting away with it in Florida, Alabama, Texas, Utah, multiple states. The DEI push is coming to an end. From inside higher ed, anti-DEI bills failed in Kentucky. Universities are restricting it anyway. Some of the state's biggest public institutions have voluntarily dissolved their DEI offices. But will that be enough to forestall legislation that guts them even more? Earlier this year, Kentucky's Republican-led General Assembly considered multiple bills targeting public universities' diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, but managed to pass none of them. By April, as their season neared its end, GOP lawmakers had run out of days to join other states that have cracked down on DEI and still leave time to override Democratic Governor Andy Beshear's likely veto. But Republicans didn't forget the issue. In July, the Interim Joint Committee on Education, meeting between legislative sessions, held a hearing on DEI. During that meeting, as Louisville Public Media reported, Republican Representative Emily Callaway said her son was exploring colleges, and she told Northern Kentucky University President Katie Short-Thompson that she was confused by something regarding NKU. And this was from the representative, not from her son. She said this, quote, "I see Black student unions. I don't see white anything. No mention. I see Black, male, and female events. My son, what would he relate to on your campus? And how is this inclusive? And how is it promoting unity while you segregate Black, white? Well, we're assuming there are some whites that go there. We don't know because there's no mention of any activities for whites." Representative Callaway said she was, quote, "having a problem understanding what the justification is when we use the term diversity to exclude, very specifically, my son." Katie Short-Thompson began her response by noting that 85% of NKU students are white and defended NKU's diversity efforts. Quote, "all students are welcome and included to attend any of the different groups," she said. "There's a place for everyone at North Kentucky University." But apparently that's when the panic set in. A month and a half later, that same president of the university wrote a message to her campus announcing a diminishment of DEI. Short-Thompson didn't say that NKU was making changes to try and forestall anti-DEI legislation, but she alluded to a possible bill. Quote, "the circumstances under which universities across the Commonwealth and the country find themselves, coupled with the legislative priorities of state leaders for the upcoming season, require universities to change." The president, Short-Thompson, announced that NKU's chief diversity officer had decided to step down immediately. Decided to step down immediately. And that, quote, as such, I've decided to dissolve the Office of Inclusive Excellence, the university's central DEI office. That's a funny coincidence. She announced the chief human resources officer would be the Title IX coordinator in the interim, and said, quote, our current array of wraparound services and programs have helped students to thrive and we're committed to continuing them. Wraparound services are additional services that are offered inside and outside normal school periods, just extra resources thrown at students, which is sometimes very appropriate, especially for disabled students, but not for students that are diversity-oriented. It should be services offered equally to all students, obviously, especially in a public institution paid for with public taxes. NKU wasn't going out on a limb and axing its central DEI office. Earlier in August, the state's flagship public university, the University of Kentucky, had announced its own self-imposed disbanding of its Office for Institutional Diversity, again with glancing references to the potential that a forthcoming law would target DEI. It appeared that the Commonwealth's public universities were starting to do what at least some lawmakers wanted them to do, perhaps as a way to head off legislators going even further. And how could they possibly go further? One of the ways they go further is limiting discussions in classrooms, which is a severe move. We would want professors to have academic freedom to talk about the things that they've researched as scholars and that are important to them and that they know a lot about. But the problem is they don't have intellectual diversity. So some states have actually passed laws, not just getting rid of diversity statements, not just getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion departments, but literally forcing teachers to teach both sides of a story, talk about both sides of history, to not lack what they call intellectual diversity. And that's extreme. But it's necessary if you've got these teachers all focused on telling the same thing to the same students in an environment where students are being discriminated against. You have to find a way to break up the cabal. So far in Kentucky, they don't have any laws like that. But in other states, they do. Indiana has an intellectual diversity law. Indiana Attorney General files to dismiss challenge to state's intellectual diversity law. If teachers don't comply with the intellectual diversity law, they could lose their tenure, meaning they could lose their permanent position. They could be fired over this. Lawmakers' last failed bill during the session was sweeping. It would have banned public colleges and universities from spending any resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion offices or initiatives with specialized definitions for those terms. But before the session ended, lawmakers did pass a bill that included a ban on race-based metrics or targets in the state's public college and university funding formulas. The Democratic governor signed it. The Lexington Herald leader reported that Beshear said he disagreed with that provision in the legislation, but supported the extra funding that the law provided. But then, the board chair of the second largest state university spoke out in favor of diversity instead of announcing concessions. Quote, by all means, no exceptions. University of Louisville board chair Diane Medley wrote in an op-ed in Kentucky newspapers, welcoming immigrants, rural students, and others. Quote, as of fall 2023, students of color represent more than 28% of our enrollment, she wrote, more than 10% of our total student body, and 21% of students enrolled in U of L online programs. While John Carmen, a Louisville spokesman, didn't provide interviews with university administrators, he wrote in an email that, quote, there are no plans to eliminate the U of L Office of Institutional Equity. The office serves all of U of L students as they progress and complete their degrees. Will lawmakers, despite some universities' own concessions, pass a bill anyway taking more sweeping measures against DEI? Or are the NKU and UK president simply implementing measures they or their boards already wanted, using the General Assembly as an excuse? Whatever the case, the Kentucky General Assembly certainly looms over the decisions universities are making. Quote, I don't really know what kind of pressure the lawmakers are applying to these presidents, said Jeremy Young, director of the Freedom to Learn program at the free speech advocacy group PEN America. Quote, but I think we're at a moment where lawmakers have found a powerful new tactic to bring about censorship and political control of universities. Young said that in states where lawmakers have targeted DEI but not fully banned it yet, politicians are jawboning universities to voluntarily disband DEI offices by making threats or withholding funds or promising to pass a bill in the future if they don't. Quote, it preys on the fact that college presidents are naturally risk-averse and need to be risk-averse in order to succeed in their roles, and it turns that risk aversion against them. He said he's seen too many university presidents in states including Alabama, North Carolina, and Wisconsin caving to these sorts of tactics because the funding is dependent on the legislature being happy with how these colleges and universities are being run. If they're being run inappropriately, it could threaten their funding. If they don't get funding from the government, they're not going to have colleges or universities to operate. They run out of money, they cease to exist. An NKU spokesperson didn't comment for this article beyond providing Short-Thompson statements. A September 3rd clarification message the president sent to campus doesn't shed further light on how her actions were or weren't connected to lawmakers' demands. It contained statements that may be reassuring to DEI supporters, saying she was providing, quote, a few clarifications based upon questions we received. The clarifications included that the valuable work of the Center for Student Inclusiveness will continue, and that NKU would continue recruiting international students. Quote, it's a little hard to understand what's going on, Young said, of the situation across Kentucky. Particularly President Capilouto of the University of Kentucky has been all over the map on this one. University of Kentucky spokesperson Jay Blanton told Inside Higher Ed that Dr. Eli Capilouto had discussions with both lawmakers and people on campus in the wake of the anti-DEI bills failing in April and found, quote, overlapping concerns between both groups. Asked why Capilouto didn't simply wait for lawmakers to pass whatever bill they would pass next legislative session, Blanton said the president's thinking was that, quote, if you're hearing concerns from policymakers and from people on your campus, you should act. Capilouto announced, as part of his changes to DEI, that, quote, we will eliminate statements that imply that the institution or unit has an official view on a current event. This applies to all university websites. Blanton said that, for example, a Native American, quote, land acknowledgement statement would not be there anymore. Also, the university has stopped requiring DEI statements in all course syllabi, according to Blanton. Also, Capilouto wrote that, quote, we will not mandate diversity training centrally or at the college or unit level. We will also not place required diversity statements in hiring and application processes. Blanton said university leaders hadn't seen any specific bill that lawmakers are planning to run. Quote, but it was clear in Capilouto's discussions with legislators and knowing the national context we're in that we're going to see something. But Blanton said he wouldn't characterize Capilouto's actions as an attempt to head off a bill with small concessions. Well, we've made some pretty substantive changes, Blanton said. Whether lawmakers have been assuaged by the voluntary scaling back of DEI at NKU and UK may soon be known. Capilouto and other presidents have been called to testify before the Interim Joint Committee on Education on September 17th. Is Representative Callaway one of those Republican lawmakers satisfied with what the universities have done? Callaway told Inside Higher Ed in an email that, quote, universities must strive to foster a culture of inclusivity and acceptance, not promote divisiveness and discrimination. She said if they're legitimately moving in that direction and not simply rebranding their DEI programs, we will recognize that adjustment. She didn't say whether that meant there would be no bill. There will be a bill. There will be a new law. They know they can't trust these public colleges and universities because if you could trust them, if they had some decency about them, they would have never put these DEI programs in place in the first place. They would have never had diversity statements. They would never even consider hiring people not based on merit. They would not let their professors aggressively push a one-sided ideological agenda. Yes, professors do have the right and should have the right to say what they have to say, but this is going far beyond the limits, and the colleges and universities are well aware of it. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.